Humza Yuzsef gave £50,000 of Scottish taxpayers' money to Hamas during the war in Gaza. This is something that I'm absolutely disgusted by, and it comes just on the back of the BBC documentary and their apology. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe, but more importantly, hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all my videos as soon as they are released. Well, we know that Humza Yuzsef's mother and father-in-law were trapped in Gaza. I will say one thing, they're ordinary civilians, and many ordinary civilians in Gaza have been incredibly badly treated by Hamas, and I want to say that they are absolutely victims that we should care about. We need to do something about it, and I have to say, for me, the idea that Donald Trump has of the rebuild of Gaza by the United States of America, I think is phenomenal, because we've tried giving aid money to them. We've tried supporting their institutions, but when you have no independent media, when you have no genuine elections, when you have no independent educational thought, when you have no real civic society, even little chess clubs are helpful to build a democratic system, because people get together away from the government, and that is something that's hugely important. And people forget that when your granny goes down to the WI, that actually is part of a civic society that builds a democratic country, and it's extremely important. But aid money is what this video is all about, because Humza Yuzsef was asked to give £200,000 of Scottish taxpayers' money to the UN Council for Refugees, but instead he increased it to $250,000 in order to give money to UNRWA. UNRWA is an odd organisation. The UN has a refugee agency right across the world, but many of the refugee agency workers are unwilling to work in Gaza. The reason they're unwilling to work in Gaza is because you can only work there if Hamas have approved you. And Hamas, as you know, only approve people that they feel are on side, which is the problem the BBC has had. More on that later. But Humza Yuzsef decided that he wanted to give to the organisation which is the separate Gaza UN organisation, UNRWA. Now, UNRWA stands accused of being part of Hamas. And I have to say to you, whether that's true in pure technical terms or whether it's true in reality, I really don't know. So I'm just checking on my microphone. I was worried it turned off there for a second. But we saw people from UNRWA driving Hamas fighters around Gaza. We saw buildings being shared facilities between Hamas and UNRWA. And that's something that I think we should be extremely, extremely concerned about. But I want to talk a little bit now about Humza Yuzsef. He's no longer the First Minister of Scotland. And I don't want anyone to think that my issue with him is his race or his religion. My issue with him is that he's once again one of these people who sees Scotland as nothing more than a repository for multiculturalism. Remember when he made that phenomenally racist speech about how Scotland didn't have enough ethnic minority people in positions of power? It's something like 90% white, by the way. I think it's even more. But what he's interested in is the same reason that people like Sadiq Khan and David Lammy like the United Kingdom. I will tell you, Sadiq Khan, Humza Yuzsef, David Lammy, they are not racist against this country. They don't hate Britain. They love Britain. But what do they love about it? They love it because they see it as virgin territory on which to build a multicultural utopia. The reason why David Lammy's not interested in Henry VIII is because it's not the history of Britain as far as he sees it. Britain is a global facility for refugees around the world to come and build a new nation together. Perhaps in the same way, perhaps we are, you know, the Aboriginals or the Native Americans of this story, the people whose history will be trampled on because of new settlers coming in who are going to build a new nation on top of the ruins of what existed before. Now, look, I'll be honest with you, the United Kingdom, well, funnily enough, I was going to say the United Kingdom was responsible for a lot of this colonisation, but actually, that's not true. A lot of the places where the British Empire existed, very few British soldiers or British administrators ever went to. Largely in India, local Maharajas did all of the work that was significant, simply because it was more to do with trading than a takeover. I accept there are some places, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, where literally lots of white people turned up and took over. but the vast majority of places were not in that position. And so I think it's important to remember that we didn't do that to absolutely everybody. But I think it's interesting, isn't it? I would always say to you that history has taught us it's always better to discover somewhere than be discovered. And we have been discovered by the world, haven't we, as a new place to move to. And that's why our statues are coming down, because it's not the history of Britain as Sadiq Khan sees it, or David Lammy sees it, or Humza Yuzsef sees it. And that's why we got to the situation that we had with the cenotaph in Britain, in London a couple of years ago, when the protest against Gaza was more important than the history of this country. As far as people were concerned, look, 500,000 people were going to march for Gaza, and so the armistice Sunday should have been stopped, should have been held back, should have had its day changed, because Gaza was the priority. And I think it starts to annoy me, because now we no longer stand up for Britain as I see it. What we stand up for is the multicultural vision of Britain, the multi-ethnic vision of Britain, the global view of Britain, where we're nothing more than just this repository. I don't think that we should back away from the fact that we are allies with the democratic world. But of course, Humza Yuzsef does not agree with that. Humza Yuzsef believes that what we should be is principally an ally for the Islamic world, including those dictators and villains that so subjugate people in the Muslim world. That's what he's interested in. That's what he believes is important. And his attitude is, well, because we have lots of Muslim people in Britain, therefore we should always support Islam in the face of its enemies. Well, actually, I think it's much more nuanced in Gaza. I think the problem is that we've got a dictatorial regime. But even if you ignore all of that subtle nuance, let's just remind ourselves of something. The BBC spent £400,000 making a piece of propaganda for Hamas, a tea organisation. Humza Yuzsef donates 50,000 of taxpayers' money to UNRWA, a tea organisation affiliated to Hamas. We are funding people that are committing atrocities around the world, and we should not be doing it. I always called out the Americans when they funded the IRA through NORAID. I believe that that was unacceptable, even though I love the Americans to bits. They've got that one wrong. But why should we be funding people like Islamic Jihad and Hamas from taxpayers' money? It's not an acceptable thing to do. It's not something that we should be doing as this country, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. And I personally, if I ever became a member of Parliament or a member of the House of Lords or anywhere in between, political advisor, I would say we need to pass a law now that prohibits the United Kingdom from funding terrorism. I don't believe it's appropriate to do that, and I think it's something that we absolutely need to stop, because if we don't, we end up in a position whereby we become the hypocrites, where we become the subjugators, where we become part of the axis of evil ourselves. Scotland should not be funding Hamas, and I will tell you, Humza Yuzsef should come here and publicly apologise for what he's done. Until next time, goodbye.